tíre atá múlaithe ag uisce agus carraig. Idir na sean áirfrothanna a chrutha sléifte agus gláanta na tíre agus lochanna agus haibhneacha an lé inne, tá tuisce ag múlú an tírdheacha seo le míle bliain. Tá uisce gláán riachtanach do gach síl, a tá sé tharbheith tábhachtach do roinnt dar blandaí agus ainmhí neamhchoitianta a ásan go maith in uisce gan bhile a bhíonn i sráide tríd tírdheach sláintúil écólaíochta. Chósta hÉireann na hÉireann atá Conamara site, agus tá roinnt go na haibhneacha, lochanna agus inbhir is glaine agus is íogaire fáil an le fada an lá. Is tarman iad na dairlí seo de spéiciis a bhíoch fáil go forleathan fud na Eorpa agus na hÉireann ach bhfuil maith tacaí orú inis fáir. Poinc Ghorma Chonamara a thugtar arúise.
The exceptional water quality of the Blue Dot sites in Conamara is really important for our native biodiversity because it supports it by providing refuge and food for our native species, for our species that are particularly sensitive, like the Atlantic salmon, brown trout, European otter and the freshwater pearl mussel. So the life cycle of Atlantic salmon is very unique in the sense that it lives in freshwater and marine waters for distinct periods of its life cycle. So it starts off life as a tiny little egg in the loose gravel beds of the well oxygenated clean waters, and it'll live and grow in the rivers for a year or more before it goes out into the sea where it feeds and grows before returning back to the exact same rivers and spawning beds where it originated from before starting the cycle again. Freshwater pearl mussel is a really long-lived species. It can live to over 120 years. It's one of Ireland's longest living animals, so it's an incredible species in that regard. It can live a really, really long time. European otter is an elusive creature, but it's actually quite widespread in Ireland, and Ireland is considered a stronghold for the species. It uses lots of different aquatic habitats. It uses our streams, lagoons, coastal environments, sandy beaches, but it really depends on for food it needs clean rivers, it needs a good population of fish and food within the river, so clean water quality, good water quality is essential for the European otter. So the wetlands along our coast are really important as well for bird life. So the coastal lagoons, those type of habitats are really important because they're important feeding grounds. And as our habitats in the county have been managed, a lot of these habitats have been lost. So they play a huge importance for our native biodiversity here in County Galway.
Faoi threat trórach an Aontas Eorpaí maidir le huisce, ní mór de éireann cosc a chur bheith gach uisce dromcha. Ciallaíonn sin nar cheart de ghabharlaí atá a riocht écólaíochta an sláintúil nó a riocht a bhfuil ard stádas acu dá le titim go stádas má nó níos measa. Tá na huiscí néireann ar cheart cosbóid ard stádas a bheith acu aitheanta ag an ngníomhreacht chuomhnú cóchéal agus tugtar uiscí Poinc Ghorma nó Poinc Ghorma arú sin sa gná. I measc uiscí Poinc Ghorma na hÉireann tá haibhneacha, lochanna, inbhir agus uiscí chósta. Ní nó Páil Callahan ólaí ar Poinc Ghorma Silegan.
The Blue Dot Catchments Programme is a collaborative programme being delivered by a range of agencies aimed at focusing resources towards the protection and restoration of our high status objective, or Blue Dot water bodies. It also aims to raise awareness among land managers and state agencies on the importance and sensitivity of these waters. You can see a list of the Blue Dots or get them on a map on catchments.ie, or indeed you can download the list from the EPA GIS portal. Ireland and Conamara in particular, so the west and the mountainous regions, have a relatively high proportion of blue dots. However, these have been declining steadily. Currently, less than half are actually achieving their high status objective, and particularly concerning is the loss of our Q5 sites. These are the closest to natural or pristine sites that we have, and currently only 35 are actually achieving the status. So the leading pressures are physical modification to the water bodies themselves and to the surrounding catchments, particularly things like drainage works, pressures relating to farming and to forestry. Other pressures include things like industry, abstractions and wastewater, but much less commonly so.
I recently retired from Inland Fisheries Ireland, but I worked for many years on salmon and sea trout fisheries. One of the major developments during my career was establishment of conservation limits for salmon, so that a certain number of salmon need to spawn in each catchment depending on the size of the catchment, and if there's more than that number estimated to spawn, then there's a surplus that can be taken. And quite a few fisheries now, they're not reaching the conservation limit, so the rivers are open for catch and release. So that's been a big protection for salmon, in that you only take salmon on catchments where there's a surplus. Sea trout, a lot of work has been done on the past in the River Erif, which is a research station for sea trout biology and a national index catchment. I suppose the big issue that occurred with sea trout in the late 80s was the establishment of salmon farms in a lot of bays in Conamara. The sea trout stock suffered a collapse due to sea lice infestation, and it's never really recovered. And since 1990, the sea trout fishing has been on a catch and release basis. So we did a lot of work looking at the impacts of aquaculture on Conamara sea trout. Sea trout in Conamara, it's acid water. There's not a lot of growth compared to the Corrib, for instance, where there's a lot of alkalinity and a lot of food, freshwater shrimp, and a lot of productivity. In Conamara, the sea trout really need to put on weight at sea. So they go to sea at about 16, 18 centimetres, and that's where the best feeding is. Some brown trout stay behind, but you know, a proportion of the sea trout are migratory, and a proportion stay behind. And but really, to put on weight and produce a lot of eggs, they need to go to sea to gain the weight in these acid waters in Conamara. The same as salmon, sea trout need clean gravel. They need, you know, in all of these headwaters or catchments in Conamara, there's clean gravel, not silted up from runoff from forestry or, you know, overgrazing from peat getting into the water. Clean gravel and good quality water, so that you know, eggs hatch out with loads of oxygen and clean water. And a lot of the catchments in Conamara are you know, they're streamy water with gravel and ideal suited for salmon and sea trout. The sea trout would use probably more of the side streams and the smaller gravel, whereas the salmon would be on the main channel of these rivers and use the larger gravel. Good quality habitat, fencing off rivers, keeping fencing back 2 or 3 metres from good spawning and nursery channels, you know, keeping forestry well back from rivers so that there's no impact from forestry runoff and pine needles, and lowering the acidity. Certainly salmon farms keeping low lice levels in the spring. When salmon and sea trout are going to sea in April and May, there is a requirement to keep lice levels lower than at the rest of the year. That's in recognition of the fact that there's potential for impacting the sea lice getting on the young salmon and sea trout going to sea. So ensuring that the lice levels are very low in the spring would be a big benefit to sea trout. There was probably 20-25 sea trout fisheries in Conamara, from Spiddle right round to Screeb, Balnahinch, Lochanna, Kylemore, the whole way. And it was very important for local gillies, local boatmen, hotels, guest houses. You know, there was a big influx of people from the UK, from around Ireland came to Conamara for the summer sea trout fishing and salmon fishing, and it provided a lot of employment, and it historically goes back, you know, into the 1850s when a lot of English anglers came to Conamara. Then the establishment of the Conamara, the Galway-Clifton railway line was important as well. It opened up Conamara for tourism and for fishing, and a lot of lodges and hotels were built around the fishing, and you know, it was a big industry for 4 months in the summer. You know, visiting anglers spent money in places like Clifton and all around Conamara, so it was important economically. Arctic char are a kind of relic species. You know, they came in like salmon and trout after the Ice Age 12,000 years ago, and they've remained largely unnoticed in a lot of these lakes. But recent developments like climate change with increasing water temperature potentially poses a threat, and then non-native fish to Conamara like perch, freshwater perch, competing for food pose another threat. Their status is in some publications, their status is described as vulnerable. There's still Arctic char in places like Lochaina, in Glendalough Lake on the Ballynahinch system, and Atry Lake on Ballynahinch, on Shindilla, which is on the Screeb system, and on the Cashla Costello system, Fermoyle Lake and Glennick Lake still have Arctic char. They're not fished for, they're deep water fish, and they don't really, occasionally they're caught by anglers, but they're all returned.
The Freshwater Pearl Mussel project was established to improve and maintain the quality of the water, and which indirectly will benefit the pearl mussels that inhabit these pristine water bodies. They have a very complex life cycle that they require attachment onto salmon and trout gills in order to complete their life cycle. So the adult mussels release glaucidia, which are the larvae of the pearl mussel, around late August, September time, and they need to find a host within 24 hours. So they attach then, if they're successful, they attach to salmon and trout gills, and they overwinter then on the gills of the fish. They have this semi-parasitic symbiotic relationship, but they have no impact on the fish, that they live alongside each other. And then the following spring, when water temperatures increase around late spring, early summertime, the glaucidia drop off the fish gills. And they need to, when they drop off, they need to drop off into pristine water quality again, into sand and gravel along the water body or along the river. And then they bury down about 5 centimetres into the gravel. And they'll remain there for the rest of their lives. And as they grow, you'll see that their siphons, that they start filtering, they become filter feeders. Important factors to protect freshwater pearl mussel would be to protect and to maintain and restore our peatland catchments, and to protect our water quality and biodiversity within these catchments, raise the water table, and work directly with farmers to support farmers to continue the good work that they're doing in these catchments as well. Continue the work of the Freshwater Pearl Mussel project. They've established since 2018 until 2023, and the Acres Cooperation Project hopes to continue the work that has been started with results-based payments for farmers and working directly with farmers to ensure that we continue to protect and maintain these habitats. There's a number of actions that farmers can take, such as invasive species removal. Rhododendron removal will be a big issue in some of these areas. Raising the water table, so block and drain, slowing the flow, creating these lovely seepages that are essential for the food for juvenile mussels within the river. Other actions would include fencing of watercourses. The Freshwater Pearl Mussel project was established to support farmers in these regions to protect water quality and to indirectly then protect the mussels. So continuing on from the freshwater pearl mussel project, we now have the Acres project, and the pearl mussel habitats, or the top 8 pearl mussel habitats, are within the Acres cooperation project zones. And we'll continue the work started by the pearl mussel project to maintain and protect these water bodies. Cooperation project is based on results-based payment for farmers, so it's the higher the quality of the habitat, the higher the payment the farmer will receive. And it's similar to the pearl mussel. It's the first time that farmers are being acknowledged and rewarded for the ecosystem services that they're providing in protecting these pristine habitats.
Tá sé ríhabhacht na darlaí seo a chosint agus a achódú chun na speice sin a hábháil. Tá cinn clár isce an údarás áitiúil nó lápro le pobal atá ghearradh bart a dhéanamh. Tá oifigí isce pobal lonnaithe i ngach chundé agus is féidir le cudú le muoinú nó tionscadal phobal. Is é Conamara uain an taifigach isce pobal de Ghaile agus Roscommon Haas.
If community groups would like to undertake a measure on their local water body or project, the first step is usually the CWO meeting with the community group out on site on their local river, lake or estuary, and the CWO can work with the local group to understand what the significant issue is in the local catchment. Then working with the local landowners and different agencies in the area, we can put in place a plan to have the right measure in the right place. Measures can be quite simple, from simple awareness raising projects like art installations or murals to training initiatives for schools and groups. Citizen science projects can be a powerful tool in deepening the local understanding of blue dots and creating a sense of stewardship in the community. Some aquatic insect species from the mayfly and stonefly families are highly sensitive to pollution. And this is why kick sampling for river insects or macroinvertebrates not just brings the river to life, but also gives an indication of the current water quality. This, along with existing data, can guide community groups as to where measures may be required. Where direct measures are required, LawPro can support groups in taking the correct action. We provide funding for ecological assessments, invasive species removal, or material for riparian fencing, wetlands and rain garden or drain blocking. We also provide funding for tree planting where appropriate. LawPro works with multiple agencies to help groups identify the correct issues and solutions to the problem. We will also provide assistance with groups with external funding calls. So sometimes the issue of water quality can be a complex one. However, the solution is usually relatively straightforward. And this is where LawPro can assist community groups in providing the supports to allow them to get on with looking after their blue dot.
Mas mála tilla ólam faoin na darlaí I dóghabhar cantar, téigh catchment.ie nó lawaters.ie.